Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So I'm going to try something a little different today. The idea is to take a classic album that you maybe haven't thought about in a while, discuss what makes it great, and then also pair it up with a drink to enjoy while listening. And today's album is the Lonesome Crowded West. It's one of the defining indie rock albums of the late 90s Pacific Northwest indie rock scene, and it's my personal favorite album from the era. I think something you might miss about the Lonesome Crowded West if you only give it a cursory listen is just how aggressively American it is. And while it's aggressively American, it's not like 4th of July fireworks, flags, chest beating patriotism America. It's a much more meek and subtle kind of American, which exposes a lot of the American underbelly, but also celebrates our culture. The album is as much American folk as it is indie rock, and there is at all times a sense of wild westernness to the sound. And at the most basic level, this album is a celebration of that sensibility and aesthetic. But digging into the tracks a little bit, the subject matter and undertones of the songs are overwhelmingly about bitterness, discontent, and simply being down on your luck. There's a large appeal to this album that's similar to, say, a Tom Waits album. It's a bit hard to ignore just how much misanthropy is on this album. Like, Cowboy Dan is about this old school cowboy type who can't seem to keep up with the fast pace of modern times, and he places his resentment on God for it. I think the album art is also really relevant here. It has these like tall buildings on it, but really a focus of the picture is the sky and just how much light pollution there is. I can imagine Cowboy Dan like looking up at this night sky and just hating how he can't see the stars anymore. I didn't move to the city moved to me is a salient line in the track, and I think that this is really fitting of sort of that mood. Another song, Trailer Trash, is about what it says. It's about feeling like you have nothing going for you in life, working hard but getting nowhere, and feeling like you have no stability. It highlights that for many, many Americans, this is the reality of the American dream. Doing the Cockroach is a criticism of commercialism and the superficiality of pop culture. It aims to create some like demented variant of dances like Chubby Checkers The Twist called The Cockroach. Bankrupt on Selling is a highlight of the album that's long been a campfire anthem for me and my friends. It's a simple folk song delivered in a frail, squawky voice that laments how much of life is lived in pursuit of the omnipotent American dollar. The last verse turns a bit introspective and notes how a lifetime of living this way can really wear you down and break you. Trucker's Atlas is a somewhat divisive track that I used to feel was a blemish on an otherwise perfect album, but nowadays I appreciate what it adds. It's effectively a 3-minute song that then goes into an 8-minute jam session. The intent of the track is to capture the feel of driving on the open highway, in the spirit of On the Road by Jack Kerouac. The jam session can be a bit boring if you give it an intense listen, but it's really meant to allow the listener to space out and ruminate for a while, entirely forgetting that the music's even playing. It's very similar to the feeling you get when you're cruising on the open highway, just following the lines and thinking about whatever's on your mind. Driving is actually a pretty strong lyrical theme from Modest Mouse's early work, as evidenced by the title of their first album, A Long Drive for Someone with Nothing to Think About. Also, the back of this LP has a couple just open stretches of road pictured. For all its misanthropy and bitterness, The Lonesome Crowded West is still a fun album. The songs are, for the most part, bright, fun, catchy, and often sing-along. It never dives into the over-the-top funness of pop music, but the album feels much more measured and subtle for it. I think after listening to this album, you'll have had fun, but in the way a meaningful conversation is fun, not a theme park. Alright, and that brings us to our pairing. I think that a good beverage can enhance the experience of listening to a great album. And for an album as staunchly American as this, I can't conscionably recommend anything other than a fine bourbon. And for my pick in particular, I will be going with Basil Haydens Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey. Basil Haydens is a high rye bourbon, which means that a large amount of rye went into the mash bill and therefore less corn than your average bourbon. I feel that the rye adds a notable amount of subtlety and spice to the palate while also softening it when compared to some other bourbons that come out with the 1-2 punch of sweet corn and acrid new oak barrel. I also feel that the rye spice is a salient feature of the finish. Basil Haydens doesn't mix or water down particularly well in my opinion because the subtlety of the rye gets clobbered quite easily, so my recommendation would be to enjoy it neat. However, I also recognize that none of you are going to go buy a bottle just to listen to this album, and very few of you are going to have this pretty popular whiskey lying around. My substitute pick is any American corn whiskey. Jack Daniel's would be a great option, as I think that's one of the best products at the $20 price point. But this album is just so incredibly Wild West cowboy in a saloon sounding that whiskey just feels like the natural choice. But for those of you who entirely don't drink whiskey, my recommendation would be a West Coast style IPA. I think the juiciness of a New England style IPA misses the feel here a little bit. I'd go with an IPA where bitterness is the primary feature. A couple of my favorites from this category are Sierra Nevada and the original Stone IPA. Alright, and I think that's today's pairing, the Lonesome Crowded West and Basil Haydens. I hope you'll enjoy giving this album a listen pretty soon, and if you'd like more recommendations from a wide range of genres, be sure to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.